Didn't do it last time. It was the year before that. And watch it's starting now.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah.
I don't see a notification. So he's gonna watch it. Here it is, here it is. Here it is, okay. Good, you're good.
Hey. Good.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Apologies for a slight bit of technical complexity, but here we are, telling your story. As you know, a group of folks, most of whom are here, thought it's kind of a community building process. We'd start having storytelling events, this being the first one. And we thought, well, what's a good theme? And the theme is, well, why are we here? Why do we like this place? How did we get here? Because we figured that fits old-timers, natives, those of us who left years ago and came back, newcomers, and everyone in between. So my name's Tom Browder. I've lived here full-time about 5 years. I have, by way of introduction, the 1965 Missoula County yearbook, Bitterroot. Why you say did I bring that? Because October 1964 is when our high school here opened. So my class, 65, was the last combined Missoula County high school class. No Hellgate, no Sentinel, certainly no Big Sky, and no Blackhawks because they really started the next year. So in my yearbook, we have pictures of the 95 to 100 folks from Seeley, who, by the way, endured the longest bus ride in the country, 60 plus miles each way. There's an article in Life magazine many years ago. So really my first kind of appreciation of the people here was like, how did these kids get through 4 years of high school when they had the longest bus ride in the country? I mean, it was just baffling. The next year, when I started college, I was fortunate to work 4 years at the Seeley Lake Ranger Station. And this is kind of the place part of why I'm here. And I was on what they call the brush crew, and we'd go out and clean up after loggers, and there was a lot of logging then, and plant trees and do things like that. And that was when I realized there's just no place like this I'd ever been, even though I grew up in Missoula. I mean, the mountains, the trees, the lakes. And you start realizing that even though then, as now, we're not an incorporated town, there's just a fascinating mix of, you know, like businesses and people and everything else up here in Seeley. So I did that for 4 years. And then after a couple of years in the Army, they actually hired me back again. So in the mid-70s, I was station fireman at the Seeley Lake Ranger Station. It sounds impressive. It's really not. It means you work weekends because you're always on call. But I did drive the Forest Service pumper truck in the Seeley Lake Bicentennial Parade in 1976. So if you see sort of a shaggy-haired guy, that would be me. I was kind of proud of that because in 67 or 68, we had a big fire west of town, probably 1,000 acres, called the Deer Creek Fire. And one of the unfortunate things about that fire is I was driving a pumper truck when the brake line went out, and I rolled the pumper truck. So all over the Seeley Lake radio net, it's like Browder rolled the pumper, Browder rolled the pumper. But actually, here at 76, I get to drive it in the big deal. So that's kind of how I bonded here, how I felt that there's just no place like it. Like a lot of us up here, I was away for many years working, but having family from both my side and my wife's side from Missoula, it brings you back. And as you come back, you like it more and more. And then when you get to be old and retired, as I am now, you can find a place to live and live here full time. I was thinking a little bit about what it was like, 67, 68. Ozzy and Coils were the two bars. They would sell beer to underage kids because we behaved ourselves for the most part. The Mercantile is where the Grizzly Claw is now. The Elkhorn was still a cafe. And for those of us that spent 3 or 4 months living in the bunkhouse up at the ranger station, that's what we did. We did that, and then we drove around and drank beer and did what young people do. Double Arrow Ranch didn't exist in the 60s. Big Sky Lake was Fish Lake. A lot of the things we see now didn't exist. But to me, and I was thinking about when we thought, well, we're going to hear from a lot of you what your story is. Even with all the change, Seeley Lake is still a place that I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. And it's the people. And, I do volunteer work and things like this. And you run into people that from other towns or other states, and you have something in common. The mountains are still here. In 1967, I climbed Crescent Mountain. I might get it done before I get to be 77. I might not. Maybe someone will help me get up there. So a lot of it doesn't really change, and that's really the attractiveness. So what we want to do tonight, and we have an audience of potentially 4,000 people because the Pathfinder, who has generously allowed us to use their Facebook page, have 4,000 plus connections. So Hollywood talent agents might be looking at us. You just never know. So we're live streaming it, and it will be, should the Pathfinder think the quality is acceptable, they might allow it to live as a video for a while. But yeah, so what we'd like you to do is come up and take, I think the instructions were 5 plus or minus minutes. Talk about why you're here, why you love it, what your story is. And if you run over, I think we'll be a little tolerant. If you run way over, you might see a hook come around and pull you out. But this is the camera, so you don't need to look at it. You can look at the other folks around. And we put little yellow dots on here, so some presenters are migrating with me. For those people who kind of pace a lot when they talk, we thought, well, this will keep you in a box. So that's a scoop. Welcome all of you out there in the digital world. We're not monitoring the chat. So like if I say something outrageous or someone else does, and you decide to put a bunch of chat in there, we'll probably ignore it, although it will get captured as part of it. But this is really us telling our stories to you, and we'll start with storyteller number 1, Carrie Benton.
Hello, everybody. Here's this desire for me to say good morning, and for those who know what I do for a living as a preacher, I'm used to when I'm getting in front of a group of people saying good morning, forgetting what time of day it is. Well, I moved here from Pittsburgh originally, but I grew up, was born and raised in Hatter, Montana, and went to undergrad in Missoula. And then I worked as a child protection social worker in Miles City. And it was there that my husband listened to me talk about, wanting to be involved in something bigger with ministry and things. So he convinced me to go to seminary to follow my dream. And so that's what we did. We were married less than 3 months, and we picked up, sold off most everything we owned, and moved across the country to Pittsburgh. And that's where I got my Master of Divinity degree, which I think is a hilarious name of a degree. Who is a Master of Divinity? Anyway, so my first job was as a jail chaplain in Pittsburgh, in Allegheny County. And the churches that I were involved in there were intentionally black and white churches working on race relations and reconciliation. But after being in Pittsburgh for almost 8 years, my husband and I being both native Montanans, just felt this, longing to come back home. He's a hunter, and you could never, there's just nothing, what they call rural in Pittsburgh doesn't fit our same definition. There were still always houses and people everywhere. It was hard to get away from anybody. And it was wearing on us. And we had a little tiny one at the time. And so we wanted to come to a place that we could stretch our wings, we could breathe, and feel some calm. And so I started looking for places out west. It was pretty not well defined, out west somewhere. That year, the General Assembly, which is our national, every 2 years, it's kind of like Congress gets together for the church, that was being held in Pittsburgh, and I was a volunteer. And in a room full of thousands and thousands of people, I sit next to a woman from Whitefish. And she starts telling me all about Seeley Lake. And as she's telling me the story, I had just looked at it on the website, the pastor online dating service website for churches. And I had just seen that the church come up, but I didn't know much about Seeley Lake. I went to school in Missoula, and I think I came up here hiking once, but that was about all I knew. But this woman was telling me all about Seeley Lake and their need for a pastor, and so I said, well, this would be great. It's in the mountains. It's small, a lot smaller, and we needed that to get out of the city. And so I applied and got an interview, and it was over Skype back then. It was back in 2012. And it seemed like they were going to hire me. Made it a long way through the process. And then I got that email that said, we're going another direction. And I was very, very confused because all of the pieces seemed to be lining up. I was very confused. And then 2 months after that, I got another email saying, well, never mind. Are you still interested, maybe? And for me, being a spiritual, theological person, I was like, oh, I get what that was. It was like this test of faith kind of thing. And like God saying, do you really actually trust me, or do you think you're doing everything? Do you think you're in charge? Well, it was one of the things that I had said to the congregation, or to the church nominating committee, when they asked me how long I would stay, which everyone wants to know that. And I laughed, and that wasn't the response. I said, here's why I'm laughing. I said, every time I've figured out what I want to do, that plan always gets crumpled up on a piece of paper and thrown in the waste bin. And so I quit writing those things. I quit writing out 5 and 10-year plans, and I just go with wherever the Lord leads me. So that was then November of 2012. The church graciously agreed to fly not only me, but my husband and daughter out. And as we came out, then December, just as we're coming out of Bonner, and I know you'll know the spot on the road, where the mountain is just like, suddenly it's just right there when you come out of Bonner. And I saw this noticeable calm just descend on my husband. And I was like, that was the last sign I needed that this was where we were supposed to be. And so that would have been December 2012. So we moved out here in March. So it's been almost 9 years that we've been here. And when we first moved out here, like a lot of people in my age group who couldn't afford to live in Seeley Lake, even if we had a job here. So we lived in Lubrecht in the experimental research forest for our first year here. And my husband worked for the camp there at Lubrecht, and it was absolutely amazing. It was the same year that they passed the law that said if there's roadkill, you can pick it up. And so we did. I made roadkill chili in this new cast iron Dutch oven, and it was so amazing. And I didn't grow up with venison, but just being able to have this provided for us was such a gift. And my husband got to do hunting. He could walk out our back door and he'd bring home some geese, and my daughter would just love to, this is when she was 3 and 4 years old, and he's, I don't know if this is a little gruesome, but he's a medical person, a nurse practitioner, and so he's very scientific. And as he was gutting the animal, my daughter was very curious, and he was dissecting everything, and it was just this fascinating moment. I remember standing there watching this happen with just absolute gratitude that we could do this. It was this beautiful moment for my family, and I love that. Other reasons why we stay. It's not just to pick up roadkill. After being here for a while, one of the things that I've grown to love are the people. In my work, I get the privilege and honor of walking with people through some of their most difficult and darkest times, and that is a great privilege and honor to have that level of trust, and so that's a lot of why I continue to stay. We still have the connection to the land. Now we've got chickens and a big garden. That's about it. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Gary. I mean, the things we heard already are amazing. Next, we'll hear from Gary Swain. Gary? I guess I can make a hockey reference about staying inside.
Yeah, I'm used to a bigger surface. This is going to be tough. My name's Gary Swain. I've lived in Seeley Lake now for 8 years, which is pretty phenomenal. It's gone by in a hurry. And started out in Cozy Corner, and then now live in Double Arrow Ranch, where I live with my partner, Lynn Ingham, and we've been together now about 7 years. I'm Canadian by birth, but I did become an American in '02, so it allows me to hang around. And during the time that I was on a visa during my hockey career, into a green card, into citizenship. So I have my Canadian passport here, and I have my American over here. So depending on where we're going, it could be one or the other. So I turned pro in hockey when I was 20 and played nine years of professional hockey, and I retired when I was 29. So at this size, it was a good thing because I could still walk and talk, and I could still manage to get a few things out. It would have been tougher if I'd stayed in that career much longer. But I ended up in Connecticut, and for the next 30 years, plus or minus, I was in real estate, construction, development, and I also did a lot of consulting around leadership with a number of colleges on the East Coast and a bunch of Fortune 500 companies. And then during some of that time, I came out here with our buddy Jerry O'Connell in the early 90s. And we found the property that he built on the Blackfoot, on 9 Mile Prairie Road. And we looked for about 3 days, and that was the last piece of property we looked at. And I said, Jerry, hello, this is it. So he bought the property back then, and between 91, 92, and is it the end of the first period? Is this where I go to the locker room? Loosen my skates and come in. So between early 90s and when I came out here permanently in 2013, I was trying to figure out a way to get out here permanently. And because I love the area, we basically fished. Basically, it was the fishing trips with 6 or 7 of us it was fishing, beer, and poker. But the fishing oftentimes was number 3 on the list. It was the other 2 that took precedence sometime before we found our way down to the creek. But I just love the area. So what I was able to do, and I used my hockey background to come out here, and I was the commissioner of 2 junior hockey leagues. So the first one was the American West Hockey League, which had teams in Gillette, Cody, Billings, Whitefish. We were all over the place. So I was the commissioner of that league for a couple of years, and I went to stayed here, but worked for another league in Washington and Oregon for another couple of years. In the interim, I was getting my real estate license. I had that back in Connecticut, but needed to get a new one here, and went to work with Berkshire Hathaway, who I'm still with after started in 14, so after 7 years, and that's been great. And I think what part of the attraction to Montana as a whole, and this area in particular, is that this area reminds me of Canada, and it reminds me of Canadians. And it's the friendliness, and it's the warm greeting that you get from everybody. I mean, I drove around New York and Boston. Let me tell you, there was nobody going to let you on the Mass Pike into a middle lane ever. They would kill you. Here, it's like, well, you go first. You talking to me? So you could, yeah. Like, wow, I love this. So the friendliness, it's kind of the heart of this area too. I've never seen a community that rallies around issues like the tragedies that we've had here, unfortunately. Some of the medical issues where people have to get to hospitals and have to raise funds. I mean, there's a GoFundMe page within an hour of some of these things, which is just like amazing because these people need the help to get their kids to a hospital in Seattle or whatever it happens to be. It's just an amazing community that way. So both professionally and work related, it's been terrific. But it's also the way I look at it now, because the community has been so good to me, is that you want to give back. I mean, it's hard not to want to give back to a place like this. So I'm currently the president of ROCS. ROCS is Regional Outdoor Center for Kinetic Sports. So we work with the Nordic Ski Club and keep the yurt in good shape up at the trails north of town. We've got the ice rink in Andy's backyard. She gives me a little inside tip every once in a while when the lights are still on at 2 in the morning. It's like, Gary, hello, could you come down here and take care of this? But we run that from about middle of December through the end of March, and it's really good. I think Josh said we have 185 kids now in the elementary school. So there's a lot of kids there, plus within the community, that are taking advantage of that rink, and we love it. So, and the other one is the new trails out at Placid Lake that we've worked on, the all-access trail, and then the trails up on the side of the lake. And so we've been involved with that, and I was recently appointed to the community council. So I think it's kind of my way to try and give back to a community that's been so terrific to me and Lynn, and it's worked out great. So as my dad said when he died at 94, and he lived in the house that I grew up in, he said they're going to have to carry me out of here in a pine box. And I have the same sentiment, that they're going to have to carry me out of Seeley Lake in a pine box. So I love this area, and that's why I'm sticking around. Thank you.
All right, next, Lynn Carey. Come tell your story.
Well, while I'm telling my story, I will throw in a little bit of history in Seeley Lake since I've lived here for 70 years. I moved here with my parents in 1951. My dad came here from Hamilton, where he came here for his work. He worked at Gray's Sawmill and managed the Tamaracks Resort. And after a couple of years, it was too much work for one man, so he just concentrated on his job at the mill. But a sidelight, as far as the history goes, when we moved here in 1951, the road from Clearwater Junction to Seeley Lake was gravel. And there was no electricity past Seeley Lake. But I had two half-sisters, and they were, one of them was 19 and the other was in her 20s. They both met their husbands. The one girl met her husband when they were he was a line boss putting in the power line. And the other one met her husband. He was working on paving the road. The schoolhouse was where Elvin Rammel lives right now. And it was the first 4 grades on one side, the upper 4 grades on the other side. And as the school grew, they had to go out and find other buildings, and there'd be like the 3rd grade would be in a different building. And we even held classes in the, I guess you'd call it the parsonage there, above the church out by the electric. Anyway, sometime in the mid-50s, late 50s, they built the grade school. And anyway, after I got out of grade school, I was one of those people that rode the bus for 4 years. The last yearbook that I have is 64. So anyway, my first job after high school, before high school I worked at Rivero's. I worked for Jerry Gray on the ranch. We hayed the Double Arrow, the Gray Wolf Ranch, and everything for shares because Jerry Gray's dad was Marshall Gray, and he fancied himself a gentleman rancher. He had about 50 head of registered Hereford cows and 20 head of quarter horses, but he didn't have any hay. So we would hay those ranches for shares. But the first real job out of high school was I worked on the construction crew that built the new high school. I worked on I can't remember the guy's name really, but anyway, we did the concrete work and the block work and everything, and got the building up, and then the carpenters moved in and finished it. Then I worked on road construction for Bud King, and that was a pretty good job. But then I tried my hand at logging, and I ran a rubber-tired skidder for a fellow by the name of Harry Spence, and I was almost killed every day. But anyway, so then I gave up logging and went to work at the sawmill, and I started out on the green chain and on the pond, and being a 20-some-year-old kid with a big ego and lots of self-confidence, they needed somebody to run the new debarker. And they came out to the green chain and said, "Would you like to try your hand at this debarker?" Well, hell yes. I can do that. And so after running the debarker for a couple of years, they discovered that through my industrial arts education that I could cut and weld and turn wrenches and everything. And the next thing you knew, I was on the maintenance crew and millwrighting on the day shift. And the day shift superintendent was a guy that kind of avoided contact, and so it ended up that I was more or less running the crew, and he was just kind of the figurehead. So he went on vacation one summer, and that was it. I was the boss, and so I think I started supervising when I was 26, and that proved to be a pretty good job. It was kind of high stress, middle management, and it paid better than average. But I was lucky enough to marry a girl from up Condon, one of the old families, the Stylers up there, and she was really sharp, and she was able to ace the civil service test and get on at the post office. And she, between the two of us, we made a lot more money than most people in Seeley Lake. And so we were able to invest wisely. And I always, when I would receive those calls from the headhunters on the West Coast offering me jobs out there, I just had an easy out. I said, my wife has a real good job here. I can't leave. And so in the 70s, about 75, we started JC Club. You're familiar with JCs. And we started the Jeep races and mud races and Loggers Day and snowmobile races, and that all went pretty well until the city fathers didn't want us holding stuff out of town. They wanted to keep the crowd in town. So we turned it over to them, and then they promptly put a road grader through the ice, trying to build the snowmobile track on the lake. And then they had, at Loggers Day, they had the fellow fall off the pole and kill himself, and that cast a real pall on Loggers Day. But in the meantime, I'd been racing motocross, motorcycles, and I got too old for that because that's a really young man's sport. And so I took up running, keep weight down. And some of my friends said, well, you ought to go skiing with us. And so I took up cross-country skiing. And being a type A personality like I am, the next thing I knew I was racing skis. And so there was a local group here that started this race called OSCAR. It stood for Ovando the Seeley Citizens Race. And there were a couple, well, first it passed between organizers. There were managers for a couple of years, and then Jeanette Cebulski and Karen Tanberg ran it for a couple of years. And then they said, we weren't going to do it anymore. You're going to have to do it. And so that was about 1992. And I've been doing it ever since. And shortly after 92, Jim Blackburn, who was the recreational officer at the ranger station, came to a couple of us skiers and said, if you guys can come up with $2,000, I can get the Forest Service, put in the rest, and we'll buy a new snowmobile. And we said, well, you know, we really don't have any money. And he says, well, Oscar has some money, don't they? And I says, well, yeah, Oscar has some money, but, you know, Oscar's kind of a separate entity. And he says, well, you got the checkbook, don't you? I says, well, yeah, I do. So I went to Karen and Jeanette and said, do you guys mind if I spend $2,000 of Oscar's money? And they says, go for it. Just don't bother to say more. And so we got a new snowmobile, and the rest is history. We've got four really good snowmobiles now, and six or seven brewing devices. And the very beginning, the grooming was all done by Woody Baxter and myself. And luckily, over the years, with all these old farts retiring and moving to town, now I've got enough groomers that we send out two people at a time, and under normal conditions, nobody has to work more than 2 days a week. And so, and here I am. I'm retired. My wife is retired. We live on Double Arrow. I like to hunt. I'm a really good elk hunter. and I can verify that. but anyway, my wife and I were just discussing within the last month or two about several of our friends that we had 20 or 30 years ago have all moved home. You know, one good friend was from Northern California, went to Berkeley during the demonstrations. And the other fellow was from Kentucky, and he married a girl that's some kind of manages a lab back there, and he became a PA, physician's assistant, and he moved back to Kentucky. And so Rose and I said, well, you know, we're already home. We can't go home. So anyway, that's my story.
Thanks, Lynn. Next we have from the Placid Lake area, and that's an area that it's part of us. You know, sometimes we think, well, it's Seeley, Inez, Alva, Rainy, and Summit, but actually Placid Lake and Salmon, they are part of our community. So we have Donna Burgess. So Donna, come on up and tell your story.
I'm going to sit, and I'm going to read most of this because I can't remember very much. I was born and grew up in Butte and spent summers at Flathead Lake. In 1942, at age 16, I first saw this part of the state. Friends of ours had a cabin on Holland Lake and invited us to come up for a few days. And that time there was no road around Holland. We had to go by boat from what is now the lodge, but it was called White's Ranch then. And they had horses that they kept at the rest that you could rent. So the next day, 4 of us went on these horses up to Upper Holland Lake, which is the kind of the entrance to the Bob, and fished and sat around the fire. And on our way through Seeley, before getting to Holland, we saw a sign that invited everybody to come to a free wedding dance at Fresh Hours Pavilion. Now, Fresh Hours was the same family, but there was a bar and there was a pavilion, which was a dance hall, and that burned down very early. Anyway, that was 1942, and my next time in the valley was in 1947, when I was a student at the University of Missoula. And I met my husband, Jack Burgess, whose family lived in Missoula while he was home visiting them. He had just finished medical school and was back on the campus visiting his old friends from the pre-war days. And his parents invited a bunch of us to come up to their cabin on Placid Lake, which the first time I'd seen Placid. They had built a cabin there in 1943 after moving from Wolf Point to Missoula. So you can imagine they enjoyed that change of scenery. After a short time of dating, I said yes to Jack's proposal at Placid Lake. We were married in Butte halfway through his internship at Duke in North Carolina, followed by 4 years residency in Kentucky, followed by 2 years in the Army. He was 18 months in Korea while I stayed in Butte with our 1 and 3-year-old. We have 2 more children after returning to Montana, first in Townsend, and then settling in Helena, where I still live. We could now spend more time at Placid, weekends and summer vacations, and later, always Christmas. As the children grew older, they found jobs in the area, and Jack joined us when he could. Then as now, friends and relatives pile in, and everybody loves the adventures offered by the Seeley Swan Valley. Hiking, biking, snowmobiling, cross-country skiing, golf, bird watching, boating, fishing, swimming, water skiing, camping, huckleberry picking, I should say. In the early life here was more primitive. At first there was no plumbing, only the outhouse, no power. We had kerosene lamps, wood burning for heating and cooking, the lake or springs for a water source, no telephone. There were very few cabins on the lake. Supplies were brought from home, although an early grocery store, the Seeley Lake Merc, owned by Tom and Embry Bird, stocked most staples, and Annabelle was a great butcher. Now look at our wonderful valley market. The drive to get here from Helena was on dirt roads from Avon. From Missoula, it was dirt from Bonham. In 1953, a cousin from Maryland came to visit and to wire the cabin. REA had come to the valley. Minutes after their arrival, his 2-year-old son took a drink from our kerosene supply. They drove madly on dirt to the Missoula hospital where his stomach was pumped. Not only do we have a paved highway, but we have a modern medical center, an update of the SOS, where my husband used to be a volunteer doctor working with Bill Wilmot, the nurse. During our time here, Seeley Lake has built a high school, a bank, a post office, restaurants, shops, a hardware store, churches, and an airport, where Jack and I frequently landed our Cessna. The Double Arrow has morphed into a beautiful addition with golf course. We knew it when the Chamber of Commerce barn was the working barn in the meadow where the Rich family headquartered, what we called horse camp. Our children and their cousins lived in tents for a week or two and learned to ride and care for their horses. We added to our stake in the area by buying 160 acres on Placid Creek from Fred Pagenstetcher in 1972. We were lucky to have the Cahoons and the Grayville people as neighbors. We built a second cabin on the lake property in 1980, and in 1993, our elder son had Lake Country Mark and Tim build a third structure where he lives and works year-round as a software developer. Our youngest daughter married a 21-year-old, not 21-year-old, but a 20-year employee of Pyramid Lumber, a great local company. They now live in Missoula, but are building a retirement home here. During their years in Condon, their 2 daughters attended Salmon Prairie and Swan Valley Elementary and Seeley Swan High School. Another grandchild works for the Forest Service, and he is now attached to the Seeley Lake Ranger Station. So we could count 5 generations in the Seeley Swan Valley, adding my 10 great-grandchildren who all play together when the families gather. My husband died almost 20 years ago at age 80. I'm now 95, and my plan is to follow him to the best last place, our cemetery of choice. Meanwhile, I hope to continue. You're supposed to laugh. Meanwhile, I hope to continue my schedule of going south to Helena for the winter and staying the 5 warmer months at Placid Lake. The town of Seeley Lake, with its many amenities, has made all of this desirable and doable. Thank you. You will help. Good job. Okay.
Thank you, Donna. In fact, you not only bring Placid Lake in, you brought Holland Lake in a little bit in the beginning. Last person we have to tell a story, Liz Britt. And Liz, we'll have you come up. She represents the newer group of folks that are coming in, so we'll hear your story.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, my name is Liz Britt, and my partner, Rob Schaefer, and I purchased our home on the Double Arrow in 2015. We made it up here full time. It'll be 4 years, December 1st. So yeah, we drove a U-Haul across the country from Phoenix, Arizona in some interesting weather. We ended up here. Rob spent his summers helping his grandfather, who ran a Packer concession out of Hungry Horse and actually the Spotted Bear area for the Bob Marshall Wilderness. So when him and I started dating, he said, we're going to end up in Montana, so I'm going to drag you up there, make sure you like it. Well, I fell in love with it. And a couple trips up, we start looking for a property. We started Kalispell area, Columbia Falls, Kyla, Libby, Eureka, looking everywhere. That was one trip. We made it up another trip. And we looked at some houses, and, you know, they were some really nice places, but not quite there yet. So another trip we come up, and we're looking around the Flathead Lake area. Lakeside, came on down Polson area. We ended up in Thompson Falls. We're driving everywhere. And we finally just said, all right, we're going to come up the other side of Flathead Lake. Rob had never been up to this part of the Montana area. So we start coming through and we hit the cow, and I'm like, that's the biggest fake cow I've ever seen. So we keep coming up, and we hit 83, and we come to Seeley Lake. And we slowed down. We started, what got us was the town. And the area. It's a great place to be. The people are so nice here. We didn't know anybody, and now 3 years later, we know a lot of people, and that's really great. We driving along through the ranch. We live on the Double Arrow. Everybody waves, which is really nice. I mean, coming from a city of 3 million people, as some of other people who come from bigger places know, you don't get that, and that really attracted us. But no, just the town in general, the snowmobiling. We had never snowmobiled before, so here we are from Arizona. We had purchased our place, and we're like, well, let's rent snowmobiles. We spent more time digging our snowmobile out than we did riding our snowmobile that first time. Now we're better at it. We don't get stuck as much, but we still get stuck once in a while. But no, this is just a really great community. Currently, I'm working at the Darloa office. I'm there part-time, and that's really given me quite an opportunity to meet a lot of great people. And, that's pretty much my story. It's kind of short and sweet, but no, we drove quite a bit around Montana looking for the right place, and this was our last stop because we had found home. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Tom Beers, and I wrote a little article in the newspaper. First of all, I want to thank those folks that presented. This was an awesome evening for us, and hopefully there were people on the Facebook that enjoyed this. And we're hoping to do this some more. You know, our little group that got together, we were convinced that this Clearwater Valley is truly a community. And not just Seeley Lake, but like Donna with Placid, Holland, people living up the valley. You know, we can do so much more as a community than we can as just individual groups. So we thought the best way to maybe start this out was for us to tell stories about why we came here and why we're staying. And I think what I've heard so far is the values that people have found. the values in the people and the values in the landscapes and what we can bring together. And I'll bet you money that as we continue with this, we're going to find that those are common values with so many of us. And it is those common values that I think will allow us to come together more as a community, many things that are positive for this community, and we can build the community from those values. So we are hoping to do our next episode or our next event in January. We haven't decided a date yet, but we're hoping those folks who are watching on Facebook will consider sending us or asking if they can tell a story, because we all have unique stories, and those stories help to bring us together. And so please contact me. I've been named the person to contact, and it's Beers Placid, BEERSPLACID, one word, @gmail.com. And when you write whatever you do, Tom, say it's the storytelling, so it doesn't go into spam, or if it goes into spam, that I can find it. Because we would like as many folks as we can to tell their story, because the more we know about each other, the more of a community we become, and the more we care about each other. We're going to see now some people on the street that you probably haven't seen before, or you haven't had the opportunity. And now you're going to know them by name, and you're going to be able to say hi. So thanks again, everybody that presented, and thanks for you who have attended.